Alright, so this is Family Poker Night, which is a level I've been working on for the past few months. So far, I'm only halfway done, and I'm here to show you what I have and how I made it. So, no intro, let's hop right into this. When I started out this level, I knew I wanted the background to be filled with lots of floating paintings and pictures. I played lowercase by knots right before I started building the level, and I really liked how these letters in the background moved in this part. I tried doing something similar to that, but I just couldn't get it looking right. Also, this isn't the actual version because I deleted that. Starting off fresh, I decided to scrap the paintings. I ended up substituting them for this wallpaper. The song this level uses, Starfish, sounds like a beachy song, so that's why the wallpaper looks like something out of a beach house. The wall felt a little bland, however, so I ended up adding this painting to it. This is supposed to be a painting of a cube jumping on those 3 pillars in Stereo Madness. I don't know if it was already obvious enough, but I just wanted to say it. Starting with the block design, I had to make a platform for the cube to start on, so I made this bookshelf looking thing. It felt a bit empty, however, so I added this decoration thingy on top of it. That wasn't enough though, so I also added this other decoration of my icon. It was inspired by this cool jam jar at the beginning of Glorious Fortress. It just helps to show you who made the level. Next, I made this lamp. I really like how it moves when you jump up and down on it. It's these little cell things that make the level feel more alive and responsive. Next up on my list was this phone. Well, actually, this is one of the last things I designed on this part, but I'm not explaining these structures in chronological order anyways. The phone has my channel page open as a reminder that you should hit that subscribe button, because I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before May, so please consider subscribing. It's free and it helps out a ton. Alright, back to Family Poker Night. I knew before I even started designing the phone that I wanted to make it glitch out when you land on it, and I think I did a pretty good job at that. After this is a can of soda. There's not really much to say here, it's just a can of soda. I did make it turn the other direction if you decide to land on the other side of it. I never thought the day would come where I'd use an event trigger in a classic level, but here we are. Next is this cool scribble block. I took some inspiration from the spikes in day 30 of S-Mango's Blocktober for 2024. They have this really cool design that makes them look like Scribble Scrabble, and I really like that. I ended up animating them using a spawn loop at the beginning of the level. I explained how you can make these in my editor tips video, so go check that out if you want to learn how to do that. Then I just made this pencil that supposedly draws the block. Speaking of pencils, the next block is also a pencil, but this time is the eraser, so it's different. Anyways, I used the same movement that I used on the phone, but mirrored so it go the other way. However, I felt that something was off, so that's why I added these particles that explode when you hit the eraser. Like I said earlier, it's the little things that make the level so much better. Next up was this popsicle that I gave some clean rotations and movements to. Now really quickly, I want to talk about these strips, because they use a feature in the rotate trigger that's often overlooked. It's an option called lock object rotation. On its surface, it makes it so that rotating objects won't rotate around the center group, but orbit around it. In other words, it makes the object move around the object instead of rotating. I bring this up because it was the only way I was able to make these animated objects always face the floor. It makes the popsicle feel like it's more in the environment since it has gravity. Anyways, after that were the 2 most complex blocks in the entire level. It's these 2 silly little dice that act as some 1x1 platforms. However, I wanted them to rotate 3-dimensionally. In case you can't tell, Geometry Dash is a 2-dimensional game, so it's really hard to add another dimension. So, when you reach a dilemma like this, you have 2 options. Number 1, you can become Sputniks and figure out how to code a program that will make the objects have a smooth rotation in the 3rd dimension, or number 2, animate it. I went with that second option. I made 4 frames for these dice, one of which being a flat 2-dimensional square. Then I made a particle trigger that spawns these wind thingies that help the dice feel like they're actually rotating. But because I am not a sane human being, I decided to only torture myself some more. I wanted these dice to roll a random number every time you land on them. This got really complicated, so I've decided not to explain how I did it. Trust me, you do not want to know. This is actually the reason I added this snake. Anytime you roll 2 ones, this guy comes down from the ceiling as a reward for rolling snake eyes. Well, that was one long explanation for these deceptively simple blocks. Good thing we only have a couple more things left to discuss. In the first part, at least. The first of which is this surfboard. It was really simple, just made a body and added some flowers to it. And because I am ultra lazy, you don't have to fact check that. I gave it the exact same movement as the lamp. Next up was this cardboard box. I wanted the company of it to be a play on Amazon and came up with Amazing. It was too late when I realized that amazing was already a real word, so oh well. However, this didn't feel alive enough, so I made these flaps rotate into position. Last up were these pads in this portal. To make them move the way they do, I took another tip from that editor tips video. This time, it was the follow trigger effect. Doing it this way was the simplest way, at least in my opinion. We also have this glow explosion thing that happens when you teleport from the bottom of the screen to the top. Not much else to say here, just a cool thing with the particle trigger. Now before we move on to the second part, I want to talk about the foreground. Not the letters, those aren't special aside from being inspired by the ones in the green flower. I want to talk about the flowers. If they look a lot more detailed than they should be, that's because I used a trick by Jam Attack. In his level, the Stellar Path, he has these flowers in the foreground of the oasis. Here's how he made them. Start by taking this rock slope thing, copy and paste it while turning it 45 degrees each time until you have a full circle. Place an object in the center to fill the gap. All that's left is to take a rock outline for the stem, and boom, you have a stunningly realistic flower. And that's it for the first part. So now we're on to the second part of this level. With a new part under the weight of my shoulders, I began pushing to complete this second part. I started again with the background. I made these houses that could fill it up. Originally, there was only one layer of these houses, that being the back layer. However, it felt too empty, so I added the other houses after I finished the block design. The houses themselves aren't that special, but I did, ironically, end up using one of Wabu's tips for these houses. Don't worry, it was one of the good ones. By making the base of these bricks black and blending, I can make the bricks go invisible, leaving just the highlights behind. I didn't want the houses to be too detailed, so that's why I did it this way. Then I just added some clouds into the background to fill up the rest of the space behind the houses. Now for the block design. I made these things? Listen, they look cool and they get the job done. They originally didn't have any of these lines going through the opaque part of it. I texted a picture of the block design I had to Mako Megs, and he was the one who suggested that I should add this. Thanks Mako, please work on your parking crystal flux. Anyways, I copy and pasted that to the rest of the blocks. Now it's time for the fun stuff. I needed to tie the second part to the poker theme, so that's why I decided there would be no better way to do it than make some of the blocks be poker cards. It wasn't that hard to do, the symbols are only 1 to 6 objects. Also, there were lots of these floating 1x1 blocks, so I thought that I could make them some floating rocks. I know, it's so original, but there were still 2 more structures that I had to design. The first was this floating structure between this block and this card. I literally just put some 2.1 rock objects in there and called it a day. Listen man, it's called working smarter, not harder. I mean, the spikes are kinda cool, but that's besides the point. We still had one more structure to build. I know I didn't have to make this one, but the level looks so much better with it. I needed to have a giant structure with spikes on the side that you approach before entering the transition. I really just made it a more spiced up version of these structures. Speaking of the transition, let's talk about that. I knew before I even started building the second part that I wanted to have the title of the level appear along with the player ball being the O in the poker. So, I started by making the screen cut to black. I then searched up a cool font that I could use for the title card. I found this font that I really liked, so I used that for the text. After that, I made the black block fall into the floor. Then I made it so that every letter moved up and off the screen independently. To make every letter move with a bit of delay for the last, I just rotated all the move triggers around the first one. And with that, the second part was done. Moving on to the third part, I wanted some sand dunes on the ground. It was a bit hard to see where you had to land on the ground, so I added some outlines to the blocks you land on. Afterwards, I added some more sand dunes in the foreground to help fill up the space. However, playing this, I just felt like it didn't look that good. Regardless, I pushed on. These floating blocks are supposed to be ruins that were connected to the sand. Yes, this part was inspired by the first part of Wildcard, how could you tell? Anyways, I tried to make some ruins that looked like bricks, and, well, at least I tried. I overall wasn't very happy with this part of the level, so I scrapped it and restarted. While my first attempt at the sand was inspired by the snow of the first part of the Great White North, this time I decided to take more inspiration from Wildcard and make the sand flat the entire time. This looked a lot better than my first try at this level, so I continued onward to build the rest of this part. I still wanted the floating blocks to be ruins, so I took a lot more inspiration from Wildcard for them. This time, I started with a more beigey color and added some default square objects for some texturing. I also saw that Wildcard had these star symbols on the ruins, so I decided to do that, but with poker symbols instead of cards. It's also probably a good time to mention that I used some area tint triggers to add this cool sweeping effect to the ruins. It helps make the ruins feel a lot more alive. Next up, I made a backing wall for these ruins. I used the same trick that I used on the houses in the second part to make only the highlights show up on these bricks. Moving on from those, I felt that the symbols on the ruins weren't enough for the poker theme, so I added these text bubbles. They have poker vocabulary words in them, like call and straight. I made them scale up into position, as well as giving them some really clean movements. I'm really happy with how they turned out, so they're here to stay. Now it was time for the background. I kept the clouds from the second part, but I definitely needed more than just that. So, I added a happy yellow sun that gets brighter every beat of the song. But even that wasn't enough, so I added a giant sandcastle as well. I really like this castle in the background of Glorious Fortress, so I decided to take inspiration from it when I made this design. Then, I made it move upwards into position at the beginning of the part. I felt that the pulses on the sun weren't enough, so I made the castle move up and down back into position every beat as well. Now there were only two things left to do: jump orb deco and indicators. I decided to do orb deco first and save the easier task for last. I thought that some support beams that connected to the orbs would be cool, and I was right. These beams look so sick. I also decided to add symbols to the orbs as well. Now really quickly, I want to talk about this ball portal. It's different from all the other portals, as this one is attached to some chains. I found out that you could skip this pink orb by doing a big leap with the robot, so I added the portal to stop people from skipping it. Hitting the orb moves the portal up and out of the way, as indicated by the sign. If you miss the orb, you hit the portal and can't get to the top of the platform to become the cube. And from there, all we had left were the jump indicators. In the first part of the level, I stole this parkour trigger effect from Space, and I decided to reuse that design for the jump indicators. Of course, these would look really bad and kinda out of place if they were there on their own. To fix this, I added some arrows on the inside, and after copy and pasting this to every jump, I was done. In total, all of this took about 21 hours to do. If that doesn't sound like a lot, just know that it took me 19 hours to completely finish my best level to date, Singularity. Anyways, if you have any suggestions on things I should add, be sure to drop it in the comments on this video. So anyways, here's the final showcase.